I stood there in the sterile courtroom, trying to keep my composure as Mr. Henderson, my ex-husband David's slick lawyer, painted me as an irresponsible, failing mother. "Your Honor," he boomed, his voice dripping with false concern. "Ms. Peterson here barely makes ends meet. She lives in a tiny, rented flat, and her employment is erratic, to say the least. How can she possibly provide a stable environment for young Thomas?" My jaw tightened. I wanted to scream that David was the one who'd left me with nothing, who'd systematically destroyed my career prospects. But I stayed silent, hands clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Albright, nodded slowly, her expression unreadable, which only amplified my terror. My son, 7-year-old Thomas, sat beside me, tracing patterns on his corduroy trousers with a small finger, seemingly oblivious. David across the room looked smug. Just as Judge Albright was about to speak, a small voice piped up. "Excuse me, Judge?" It was Thomas. Everyone turned. David stiffened. Mr. Henderson looked momentarily flustered. "Can I show you the papers I found in Daddy's briefcase? The ones he was looking at with a man on the phone, saying it would make sure I lived with him?" The courtroom went utterly still. I had no idea what papers he meant. My heart hammered against my ribs. But David's sudden pallor told me everything. Something was about to break wide open. I wasn't always this shell of a woman, terrified of speaking up. Before David, I was an aspiring architect, passionate about sustainable design, with a promising junior position at a well-regarded firm. David swept into my life like a charming, confident force of nature. He was older, established in finance, and he showered me with attention and grand promises. "You're too talented to be slaving away for someone else, Sarah," he'd say. "Focus on your creative passions. Let me take care of the practicalities. We'll build our dream life together." I was young, in love, and I believed him. When Thomas was born, David convinced me to leave my job. "You need to be with our son," he'd coo. "We don't need the extra income right now. This time is precious." I agreed, thinking it was a temporary arrangement, but temporary stretched into years. He took control of all our finances, giving me an allowance that barely covered groceries. If I questioned his spending or suggested I wanted to return to work, even part-time, he'd become dismissive. "The industry has moved on, darling. You've been out of the loop too long." Or, "Thomas needs his mother. Don't be selfish." He slowly chipped away at my confidence, isolated me from my professional network, and made me feel utterly dependent on him. When he announced he wanted a divorce, claiming I'd let myself go and lacked ambition, I realized I had nothing in my own name. No savings, no recent work experience, just a son I adored, and a future that looked terrifyingly bleak. He'd cleared out our joint savings account the week before he moved out, saying it was his earnings. He hired Mr. Henderson, a notoriously aggressive divorce lawyer, immediately. I was left scrambling, trying to find a place to live with Thomas on virtually no income. We ended up in a small, damp flat in a less desirable part of town, the only place I could afford after pawning the few pieces of jewelry my grandmother had left me. I took on cleaning jobs, cash in hand, anything to put food on the table and keep a roof over Thomas's head. He never complained, my brave little soldier. He'd hum tunes while I scrubbed floors in other people's houses, telling me I was the best cleaner in the world. We didn't have a car anymore. David had taken it, claiming it was a company asset. We took the bus everywhere. Sometimes the electricity would be cut off for a day or two until I could scrape together enough for the meter. I'd light candles, and we'd pretend we were camping indoors. I didn't tell my parents how bad things were. They lived miles away, and I was too ashamed. They'd never fully trusted David, had warned me he was too controlling, too possessive, but I'd been blinded by what I thought was love. When David filed for full custody, claiming I was an unfit mother living in squalor, it felt like the final, crushing blow. He wanted to take the only thing I had left. The morning of the court hearing, my stomach was in knots. I'd borrowed a smart, but obviously second-hand navy dress from a neighbor. As I got ready, Thomas sat at our small kitchen table, meticulously drawing a picture of a superhero protecting a smaller figure. "Mummy," he asked, his brow furrowed with a child's earnest concern, "is the judge going to be nice?" I forced a smile. "She'll be fair, sweetheart, and Mummy will tell the truth." But I wasn't sure if the truth, my truth, would be enough against David's wealth and his lawyer's manipulative tactics. We arrived at the courthouse, Thomas clutching my hand tightly. I had a worn plastic folder containing Thomas's school attendance records, a letter from his teacher praising his progress, and a few bank statements showing my meager income and mounting debts. It felt pathetically inadequate. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was intimidating. David sat there, looking cool and collected in an expensive suit, occasionally whispering to Mr. Henderson, who then smirked in my direction. When it was his turn, Mr. Henderson launched his attack. He painted a picture of me as a destitute, unstable woman, barely clinging to sanity and incapable of providing for Thomas. Her son wears shoes with holes in the soles, Your Honor, he declared, his voice filled with mock pity. His school lunchbox often contains little more than a dry sandwich. This isn't about malice. It's about capability, or rather, a lack thereof. I wanted to scream that those shoes were patched lovingly every night, that I skipped meals myself to ensure Thomas had something, anything to eat. I wanted to ask David where he was when Thomas had a raging fever, and I'd walked miles to the late-night chemist because we couldn't afford a taxi. But I bit my tongue. I knew that in court, emotional outbursts are seen as weakness, as instability. Judge Albright listened intently, her expression unreadable, as Mr. Henderson laid out his irrefutable evidence of my unfitness. My heart sank with every word, and just when I felt I might actually crumble under the weight of it all, I felt that small, insistent tug on my dress. Thomas, my sweet, brave boy. Excuse me, Judge? Thomas repeated, his voice small but surprisingly clear in the suddenly hushed courtroom. Judge Albright, who had been about to make a remark, paused, looking down at him over her spectacles. Mr. Henderson sighed theatrically, as if this was a ridiculous interruption. David shot Thomas a look that could freeze fire, a look of pure, unadulterated panic. Can I show you the papers I found in Daddy's briefcase? Thomas continued, unfazed by the adult tension swirling around him. The ones he was looking at with a man on the phone, saying it would make sure I lived with him and Mummy wouldn't get any more money? My blood ran cold. What papers? He'd never mentioned anything like this to me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. David was now visibly sweating, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of his table. Mr. Henderson's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror. Thomas, darling, what are you talking about? I whispered, my voice barely audible. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on Judge Albright, who now leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. Young man, she said, her tone softer than it had been all morning. What papers are these? Thomas reached into the small backpack he'd brought, the one with his coloring books and a snack. He pulled out a slightly crumpled, official-looking document, folded in 3. It was a single sheet, but it felt like it weighed a ton. These uns, he said, holding it up. Judge Albright beckoned him forward. Bring them here, son. Thomas, small but resolute, walked past the stunned lawyers, past his pale-faced father, and placed the document on the judge's bench with both hands. The silence in the courtroom was absolute, thick with an almost unbearable suspense. The moment Judge Albright picked up the paper, David audibly gasped. Mr. Henderson tried to object, stammering something about improper procedure and unverified documents, but the judge silenced him with a sharp wave of her hand. Her eyes scanned the page, her expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief, then to a cold, hard anger. She looked up, not at Thomas, but directly at David. Mr. Peterson, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, perhaps you'd care to explain. This asset transfer strategy document, prepared by Financial Solutions International, dated 2 months before you filed for divorce? David opened and closed his mouth like a fish, no sound emerging. Mr. Henderson rushed to his side, whispering frantically, but the damage was done. Judge Albright continued, her voice now ringing with authority. This document outlines, in rather explicit detail, a plan to move significant assets into offshore accounts and shell corporations to undervalue your business interests and, I quote, minimize spousal and child support obligations to negligible levels while ensuring a favorable custody outcome by portraying the other party as financially unstable. It even suggests, and I quote again, leveraging the child's emotional distress for tactical advantage during proceedings. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. The silence was deafening. Every eye in the room, except David's, was on him. He looked like he was about to be physically sick. I was stunned, frozen. I knew David was ruthless when it came to money, but to see his duplicity laid out so clinically, his intent to not only impoverish me but to use our son as a pawn, it was beyond anything I could have imagined. Judge Albright placed the document on her bench. Mr. Peterson, you have attempted to perpetrate a fraud upon this court. You have deliberately sought to mislead these proceedings through financial deception and emotional manipulation. She turned to me. Ms. Peterson, were you aware of this document or this strategy? No, Your Honor, I managed. My voice choked. This is the first I've ever seen or heard of it. Thomas looked up at me, his eyes wide. I heard Daddy on the phone saying this paper would make the judge think you were bad with money, Mummy. I didn't want you to be sad. Judge Albright's expression softened as she looked at Thomas. You did a very brave thing, young man. She then addressed Mr. Henderson, who looked utterly defeated. "This hearing is adjourned. I'm ordering an immediate forensic audit of Mr. Peterson's finances and a full investigation into this matter. In the meantime, temporary sole custody of Thomas Peterson is granted to Ms. Peterson. Mr. Peterson's visitation rights are suspended, pending the outcome of the investigation." David finally found his voice, a strangled cry of, "This is outrageous," but the judge simply gavelled, her decision final. I pulled Thomas into a tight hug, tears of relief and disbelief streaming down. My face, my son, my tiny, observant son, had just saved us. I walked out of that courtroom holding Thomas's hand, feeling like I was floating on air. My legs were shaky, but my mind was surprisingly clear. Mr. Henderson didn't even look at us as he hurried. David away, his face a mask of barely concealed fury. The court-ordered investigation into David's finances was swift and thorough. Ms. Davies, a no-nonsense forensic accountant appointed by the court, uncovered a labyrinth of hidden accounts, undeclared assets, and a systematic pattern of income manipulation designed to defraud not only me, but also the tax authorities. Each revelation felt like a small piece of my stolen life being returned. For so long, David had made me doubt my own sanity, my own perceptions. Now, the irrefutable facts were laid bare. The final hearing was less of a battle and more of a formality. I had a pro bono lawyer by then, a kind, determined woman from a local women's advocacy group. David looked like a broken man. His new lawyer, a far less flamboyant character than Mr. Henderson, spoke in hushed, conciliatory tones. Judge Albright entered the courtroom, her demeanor as stern as ever, but there was a new weight to her words. "This court has reviewed the findings of the financial investigation into Mr. Peterson," she began, "and finds overwhelming evidence of willful non-disclosure, asset concealment, and a deliberate attempt to pervert the course of justice. Such actions are an affront to this court, and more importantly, a betrayal of the best interests of the child involved." She paused, then looked directly at me. "Ms. Peterson, in light of these egregious findings, and your demonstrated commitment to your son's welfare under extreme duress, this court grants you full legal and physical custody of Thomas Peterson. Mr. Peterson is ordered to pay substantial retroactive child support, all your legal fees, and will be subject to supervised visitation only, pending a psychological evaluation." The gavel fell. It was over. It was truly over. Thomas, who I'd left with my neighbor for this final hearing, would be waiting for me, safe. That evening, Thomas and I had a victory feast, pizza and ice cream, his favorites. We danced around our little living room to silly songs on the radio. It wasn't a palace, but it was our home, filled with a newfound peace. I held him close, this incredible little boy who had faced down giants with nothing but the truth. It's been nearly a year since that day in court. Life isn't magically perfect. I still have to budget carefully. I'm slowly rebuilding my career, taking on freelance architectural drafting work from home, an old colleague kindly passing small projects my way. It's a start. The constant, crushing fear that shadowed my every move is gone. That feeling of impending doom, of David somehow managing to snatch Thomas away, has lifted. David made a few pathetic attempts to challenge the ruling, to reduce the support payments, but the evidence against him was too damning. He attends his supervised visits sporadically, looking more like a ghost than the arrogant man he once was. Thomas is polite but distant with him. He doesn't ask about his father much anymore. I've been going to therapy. It's helped me unpack years of emotional abuse, to understand how David systematically eroded my self-worth. I'm learning that I wasn't weak for being manipulated. I was strong for surviving, strong for protecting Thomas, strong for finally finding my voice again, even if it was my son who first showed me the way. Thomas is thriving. He's joined the school football team, and his teachers say he's more confident, more outgoing. He still talks about the day we told the judge the truth. One afternoon, we were walking in the park, and he asked, "Mummy, was Daddy very naughty to try and trick the judge?" I looked him in the eye. "Yes, darling. He made some very big mistakes, but the most important thing is that the truth came out, and you were a very brave boy for helping that happen." He nodded, a solemn understanding in his young eyes. That small, crumpled piece of paper he'd found hadn't just been evidence. It was a lifeline. He could have ignored it, been scared to mention it, but he didn't. Because even at 7, my son knew the difference between right and wrong. That's what we're doing now, Thomas and I. We're growing. It isn't always a fast or easy process, but it's steady. Every week we move a little further from the fear and a little closer to peace. People sometimes ask me how I stayed so calm in court, how I didn't break down under all those accusations. The truth is, I nearly did, 1,000 times over in my mind. But when you're a mother, and your child's entire world is on the line, You find a strength you never knew you possessed. You keep breathing, you keep standing. Not because it's easy, but because giving up is never an option. This story began in a cold courtroom, with me being accused of being too broken, too poor, to be a good mother. It ended with the truth being spoken by the smallest, bravest voice in that room, a child who understood integrity and wasn't afraid to stand up for it. We didn't win because we had power or money or a perfect facade. We won because we had honesty, because love persevered, and because even when the odds were stacked impossibly against us, we refused to be broken. If I've learned one thing, it's this: justice doesn't always come easily, but it can still come. And sometimes when it does, it arrives in the most unexpected way, like a folded piece of paper in a little boy's hand, held with quiet courage, offered with unwavering love. That was the day everything changed, not just in court, not just legally, but in my heart. That was the day I stopped just surviving and started truly living again. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength it takes to keep going when everything is against you, then please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone. Leave a comment, whether you're a parent, a survivor, or someone who just believes in truth and justice. Your voice matters here. I read every single one. And if you want more real stories about resilience, love, and what it means to fight for what matters most, subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here, one that sees people, not just their struggles. Thank you for being part of it.